Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Oh, come on. Good afternoon. All right. Very good. Well, we're here to spend some time with, I think, one of the most amazing people that we have at this entire university, Misha Poore. And we're also here to celebrate Diversity and Inclusion Week. And so I am going to introduce Misha briefly as someone who's relatively new to the university, but who's already made a huge mark in leading diversity, inclusion, and equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, but also somebody who stands for treating everyone like you want to be treated. Misha's a lawyer and is, I think, the immediate past chair of the board of
the mandatory state bar. So all 6,000 plus attorneys, I was privileged to be president over.
President of them. So Misha has leadership in her veins, and I've heard her sing before, and she's also very talented. But I think importantly for us, she is coming to us at a very important time for this health science campus, for this university, this state, this country, and this world, because there's so much change afoot and so much opportunity. And we need people that are lights to help be beacons for others of us. And Misha is certainly that. So Misha, I'm going to let you make a few comments.
Sure.
I'm going to step aside and then we're going to talk. And I have some very penetrating questions.
Well, thank you, Clay. I appreciate it. Well, it is an honor to be with you guys today. I don't walk around normally with my phone, but I wanted to read something to you that I think is very profound. So let me tell you that in my team, I have, and my assistant, Richard Anderson, is here. Richard, if you'll, yay. Like, he doesn't like me to do it, but, and my GA, Jahad Dixon, is here. If you'll rave, thank you. The reason why I mention them is because my team is as committed to this issue as I am. And so Jahad, he sent me something, and it was a very provoking article about diversity. And when we hear diversity, let me be honest with you, and I'm not oblivious to this, even though it's a part of my title and my division's title, I know that people get very exhausted by that word. You feel like it's something that you can't do. You feel like it's overwhelming. You feel like sometimes we've been trying and we haven't seen the results. So let me talk with you about that a little bit, but let me read this to you first. And Jahad actually sent this article to me. And here's a quote that really stood out. Meaningful diversity work cannot be seen as something that is supplemental or remedial, or taught it only in times of crisis or promotion. Diversity is not philanthropic. For diversity work to thrive, it needs to be a part of everyday life on campus for everybody. And I felt that it really was impactful to me. And I talked to actually the leadership team this morning about the same exact quote. And I talked about it because, I believe in this thing called the ripple effect of awareness. And some of you all were in a panel a discussion that I had earlier last week that talked about the ripple effect. So you've heard of a pond, a lake. Some of you all have thrown rocks, picked the perfect rock, right? It has to be smooth. It has to be small. But the more you put that power to it, it begins to hit and it makes ripples. And you always go back to find the perfect rock. I've done it 1,000 times. That's what we have to do as a university. We have to first be self-aware. You have to be aware of where you are. And I always tell my groups when I talk with them that I will meet you where you are, but I expect you to be further down the road the next time I see you. We all have different experiences. If you believe that you can do your job and never talk about diversity or only talk about it once or do it annually because it's a thing to do or doing it during Diversity Week because it's Diversity Week and that's what we're supposed to do because it's Diversity Week, we're missing the mark, we're missing opportunities, and we're not really making a place where people belong. And that is the reality of this. We want this to be a good working experience. We want students to feel comfortable. We want to feel comfortable. And we want to welcome new people to feel comfortable here. And so that's what my job is. And we do it from puppies. And they got me doing it with insects this week, too. So we have an insect zoo, too. So anyway, whatever works and however we can reach you, we'll reach you. And so I am originally from West Virginia, born and raised. I always say on the playground where I spent most of my days. But I'm from the west side of Charleston, very proud to be from Appalachia. Went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., our national's capital. I I went to Southern University Law Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I'm licensed to practice law in West Virginia and Alabama. You heard Clay talk about that I was the president of the West Virginia State Bar, the first African-American woman to be the president over all the lawyers in the state since the inception of the bar. I also was a member of the legislature. I was that for 5 years, and I was the first African-American to do that. Now, I'd love to say that the firsts are a big deal. It's exciting, and I'm very honored. But we don't want to keep seeing firsts. We want to see a continuation of things. We want to see that ripple effect of awareness, that you see the value in our differences. And that's what I want you to understand. You must see the value in the differences of our students and our faculty. And we have to be intentional about how we are recruiting with our search committees. What are we doing with our curriculums, and that we are intentional, because when you're talking about health, health is a different conversation to different people. And it may be how you learn it, but you have to be responsible for learning the book smarts and then the common sense approach. I am not here to tell you I know anything about your profession, so please don't take it personally. I don't want to do Clay's job. I don't want to do your job. It takes a different type of person to do the work that you do. But I am very good at what I do, and I love people for being people, right? And what I want you to understand, if you remember that quote, it talks about an everyday thing. If you're talking about everyday work, you know, as an African-American woman from this great state, my conversation is going to be totally different than others in this space. And that's not a bad thing. There's value to that. If you sit in my community and you talk about health, it's going to be different. Some people have the pleasure of talking about death on a regular basis, and they see no qualms with it. There are certain communities that when you talk about death, they don't want to talk about it because they believe it's going to fast track that. And you have to understand that as people in the medical field, when you are addressing different populations, your care has to change. And if you're talking about being the best at your game, you have to be the best again in common sense, culturally courageous, how you interact with different cultures as you are delivering your information, and making sure that you're always self-aware of what that looks like, reevaluating and reflecting. And so for me, this is something that I love to do. I love to be unapologetically comfortable talking about diversity. It's very important to me. I believe that we can always encourage one another to be courageous when we're talking about this. It is not an easy topic sometimes, but it also is not as hard as some of us make it. And I want to make sure you're understanding that too. I tell people that need to do the Harvard implicit bias test. And Clay, you can interrupt me anytime because I can talk, honey. I can talk. The implicit bias test from the Harvard University study. All of you all, I want to challenge you today to take that test because it is something that's private to you. Nobody's going to be looking over your shoulder. Hopefully you will have a dialogue with some of your people. I would even challenge you departmentally wise to say, hey, let's get a group of people. If you got people you go to lunch with every day, you need to ask them to take the test with you. Say, hey, Friday, guys, let's take the test. Let's talk about it on Monday when we go to lunch. I call them table conversations, kitchen table conversations. Most of the time when we want to have a discussion, we do it while we're eating. That disarms this conversation. We're not sitting in a space like this. No one feels like they're going to be hammered and you're talking about friends. That goes back to that ripple. You're changing conversations. You're in your immediate circle, which will spread out hopefully to their families, which will spread out to other things. We are responsible for this institution, but we're responsible for the community because we're a land-grant institution. 1.8 million West Virginians, as you've heard, depend on what we do at this institution. And if we're not getting it right, then our state's not going to get it right either. And we have to have that conversation, and we have to be okay with having that conversation. But most importantly, you have to be okay with not knowing. Oftentimes, when we talk about race, there's three things that we have been told and not to talk about. Somebody tell me what one is. Politics is one. Something else. Religion, what's the other? Race. So we said politics, race, and religion are three things we've been told not to talk about. And the three things that we need to be talking about is politics, race, and religion. Because those are the things that unfortunately divide us. When I thought about this job, and the reason for, one of the reasons other than President Gee is absolutely amazing, it was, where can I do my best work? I am from here. I've talked internationally. I've spoken throughout the country. But I love this state because this is where I'm from. And I can think of no better place to give my best than the place that created who I am. And so I had opportunities to go other places. I was actually being recruited and looked at from other places. And then President Gee contacted me. And when I sat down and I thought about it, I said, you know, we went one way when it came to politics. People have stereotypes about my beautiful state. I myself see where we need to grow. I've done it in different ways with policy. Where can I do my best work with this conversation about diversity? Right here at home. And I think that we can move the needle. I wouldn't take this job if I didn't think I could be successful. That is not how I operate. And I want to challenge each and every one of you all to do me a favor. Some of you all participated, but it changed every audience. So put your hand on your heart and close your eyes. And as you are getting yourself centered, I want you to become present right now. I know we all have tasks that we have to get to, but this is an hour conversation where we're going to be talking about a few things. I want you to forget that you have phone calls that you got to answer. I know I just kind of got some of y'all hearts racing. But I want you to be present. And I want you to check in with yourself. I want you to listen with honest ears. I want you to be honest about where you are in this conversation. All of us can do more. And so I want you to repeat after me. Say, I. State your name. I'm committed to do this work. I'm committed to stepping outside of my comfort zone. I give myself permission to be uncomfortable today. I'm committed. Okay, open your eyes. Now, that seems kind of weird that I had you give yourself permission to be uncomfortable. But just like there's 3 topics that we don't talk about, there's something else that we automatically do. We never want people to think we're vulnerable. And we never want people to think we're ignorant to a topic. So we put up a wall. And because we put up the wall, we sometimes don't allow information to come in because while we're receiving that information, we're challenging it, fixing it in our mind to make us comfortable, even though we know we're not where we need to be. Does that make sense? And so I want you to have permission that as we have this dialogue, that you ask the questions you feel you need to ask, that you engage the way you need to engage, that you understand that we're all learning this thing together. There's no perfect approach to anything. There's just ideas and conversation. And so we're going to continue to have conversation today. I'm very excited. Every time you see me, I'm going to challenge you. I've told another class, not a class, but I told another group, I think we're around the same time. It was 12:19 then. And I remember that. Now it's 12:14. And today is October the 2nd, Richard. October the 2nd, 12:14. Where you are right now, you will not be when we finish this conversation. And you only will not be if you allow yourself not to be. WVU is not a place where we need to be stuck, okay? Let's be real about it. I know some of you have been here for years, and I just started. 6 months in, I'm still a newbie. I get it. I call myself a freshman. I like that because I don't know where half these places are, but I'm figuring it out. And that's the same with you. You're not going to know where half this stuff goes, but you need to work and figure it out. You need to ask questions, and you need to step outside your comfort zone. And we hope that you will continue to do that with my team. And I have some other team members in the back. Will you raise your hands? My beautiful family back there. We have prevention specialists. We have investigators. We have trainers. And we really are committed to this work. We do it every day. It's not easy work, but we do it and we're very committed. And I appreciate you guys being here as well. So I'm fine to continue any questions you have, Clay.
All right, let's start the conversation.
All right.
In a more formal way.
Hopefully I don't fall off this stool. That would be embarrassing.
You're close to a hospital. We're okay.
I'm okay.
So, Misha, you said you didn't want to do my job, but given that you're a lawyer, I don't want you to do yours with me.
I won't.
So what we want to make sure of during this time is that we talk about some of these important issues, and you're so articulate. That was really amazing. But also that we get to know you a little bit better and that we hear from people in the audience. So don't hesitate, raise your hand, come up to the microphones. Do we have some mobile microphones as well, or are we coming up to these? We're coming up to these. So feel free to stand up and ask your question. So Misha,
Yes.
tell me, so you read that beautiful statement about diversity. Talk about what you think the foundation of the discussion that not only we're having, but that we should get to. So should we see it in the future, diversity, equity, inclusion,
Sure.
versus how we're seeing it perhaps today, how people might be perceiving it?
Well, let me just say this. This conversation is not a trend, right? I've had someone say, it's the hot topic. I'm like, look, it's been my topic ever since I was born. So diversity is not a hot topic. You need to understand that. It might be something that the world is now talking about more openly, but it has been something that people have been dealing with their whole entire lives. And so you don't need to see it as something as a topic, but you need to see it as a matter that we collectively work together on. And it is going to take all of us. There's, just because I'm African American doesn't mean I know everything about Black people. Just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I know everything about women. And so don't think that one person knows all facts. Don't think that you can't learn facts. And don't think that you can't be a teacher. And so when we think about diversity, diversity is a very fluid thing, right? And I say fluid, it means something for me, but it may not mean the same for you. It may not be the same for someone else. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just means that you have to define it for you. For me, but now saying that is, it can be LGBTQ. Most of the time when we talk about diversity, the only time we care about it when it affects us. And when the population is majority white, the reality is it only begins when we can start looking at other people's plight. And we begin to open up and say, wait a minute, if it's affecting this sister here, it's affecting me too. And seeing our commonalities. If it's happening in my community, then it's affecting me. If we're at this institution and you can't get recruitment, it's affecting this whole entire campus. The whole entire campus. It's not just one portion. It's the whole entire campus. It's the whole reputation of this institution, the place you work. And so you should be wanting us to be more inclusive. You should be wanting us to be having more conversation about diversity. You should be wanting to learn more about how you can be a partner in this conversation. And so it is not a trend. It is an everyday discussion that impacts people daily. It is something that all of us have a part to play in. And each day we're going to keep trying to do it better.
Right. So we talk a lot out here about going from disease to health. And we talk about the root meaning of the word health. And I don't know if you know this or not, but the root meaning of the word health is wholeness, WHOLENESS, which is also shared root word for holiness and a derivative of holistic. So talk about sort of this idea about, although we might look at diversity from the outside, though on the inside, we're really the same.
Sure.
At our basis.
Sure. I actually think that the conversation, you think about being in, when I think about 3.8% African American living in West Virginia. And a lot of times, and I'm sure you have other populations that we say are a small number, they're not included in any type of data that we collect or not included in any of the studies. Think about being here, being born and raised, and I'm speaking only for me when I be given to these examples. I'm born and raised in the state of West Virginia, 3.8% African American, a lot of representation in a lot of government, don't see a lot of representation at institutions, don't see a lot of representation throughout the state as a whole. Now imagine not being included when they start talking about immortality for birth of children, that you're not talking about African American children that are dying. Whether I be a mother or not, the reality is for you not to count a population that exists in this state and not see where it impacts the total picture makes it seem as though I'm invisible. Now, when you think about you coming into a workplace every day, and let's just say your boss doesn't speak to you. Doesn't matter how nice you dress. Doesn't matter how chipper you are in the morning. Doesn't matter if you bring them coffee or not. They don't see you. That goes to your wellness. And it will affect your attitude. It will affect how you interact with your colleagues. It will impact how you work with your patients. It will impact how you operate within this institution. And so imagine if you have a diverse background, whether you're a first generation college student, LGBTQ, women, minority, however you define yourself, whatever that definition is for you. And I do air quotes because some people say whatever. It's diverse, it's not air quotes for me, but however you define diversity for you, now imagine that you don't even exist, that you're invisible and no one cares. How would that impact your wholeness? I can't bring my full self to my job because no one wants to talk about the fact that they've discriminated with me whenever I change my hair. I can't wear my hair the way I want to. I can't wear a religious wrap on my head without people questioning me and me having to explain myself. I can't. And when you can't bring your fullness somewhere, then the wholeness of who you are impacts the value in which we hired you, impacts the value in which you want to give to this institution, impacts what you can do as what I call global ambassadors. And we are all global ambassadors. At the end of the day, you represent an institution that spans the globe. We might be stationed in West Virginia, but we reach far wide. And so we have to understand that if we really want to stand behind what we want to be overall, that our attitudes and our approach and our conversations have to reflect the global wholeness, a global wellness of the individuals that are housed here with us. And so to me, diversity is wellness. And if you're not addressing it, then we're still sick.
Very powerful. Okay, let's pivot for 1 second. Let's talk about you a little bit.
Okay.
So tell me about your family.
Well, my dad passed away. My mom lives in the same house I was born in. I have a brother who lives in Ohio, and I have nephews and nieces. And so I am the baby of the family, and I would never say I'm spoiled, though.
Tell me about your sort of most compelling sort of leadership lesson that you've learned, either since you've been here or before, because you do represent, to me, a really powerful leader for not only the university, but for our state and beyond.
Thank you. I mean, I think one of the hardest things, and I'll say this, is getting in a conversation with people who don't want to move forward, right? And I've been lucky not to have that happen since I've been at WVU. But I know that there will be some people who are not all on board with what we're talking about. I know that people have attempted this conversation well before I got here, and have had some pushback. And I'm not saying pushback particularly from administration, over the top administration, but I'm saying that if our deans and our chairs don't see the need for this, then we're not going to be successful. That's just the truth of it. And so I think for me, it is regardless of who accepts, I know the cause is just. I know that the work that I'm doing is necessary, and I continue to move forward. And so the lesson, and that's not just here at this institution, that's the same when I was a member of the legislature, that was the same when I was a lawyer, and that's the same as a community activist. It doesn't change. You have to take those licks and figure out that that's a part of life. And I think that kind of just comes from lessons learned. But that's how I operate, is that I recognize that everybody's not going to love this conversation. Everybody's not going to welcome it. But at the end of the day, we're still going to be successful.
Talk about the rules of the house that you grew up in.
What do you mean? There's a lot of rules.
Every house has their rules.
Everybody has a rule. I mean, well, my mom and dad were great parents. They were, and I would say, some would say strict, but the reality is my parents understood what world we lived in. And they also understood that there will be some people in life that would attempt to put limitations on me before I was given an opportunity. And so with that, they always pushed me to continue to strive beyond what people would try to put me in a box to be. And so when I talk about my first, I'm not saying in any way to say that I don't appreciate my first. Those are God's blessings to my life. But I think that there was a lot of things that I had to jump over and go under and go through to get to those opportunities. And I'm very grateful for my parents giving me that first example of leadership.
What would you say is your most endearing trait?
I don't know.
Remember, these are uncomfortable conversations.
I know. I really do love people. and I think that is I try to, I try to make people feel welcomed. I really do. I hope that people feel like they're being heard when they do bring issues to me. And I really just want the best for people. When I was a member, I was a public defender when I first started practicing law. And I started off with juvenile justice. And one of the things that I felt was if I got them when they were young, they wouldn't be adult knuckleheads. So I start with when they were babies. And so that's why I went into juvenile justice. And then, of course, you can only stay so long in one place at the public defender's office. So, of course, I began to do more serious felony offenses for adults. And it didn't matter if someone was going away, honestly, for a very long period of time. I wanted them to feel like that they were better because they've met me than before. And that they had some level of hope, whether it be that they were going to come, if they were eventually going to come out, that they would come out with a GED, or they would be drug free, or that they were able to figure out what their next steps would be to not live the life that they've already lived. And so to me, it doesn't matter what your situation is, that you can really be better than you currently are, and that you should always strive for that. And so that's my goal, is to always meet people where they are, but hopefully that when they met me, that I've helped change them to see the hope in things.
What's been your craziest experience since you've come to the university?
Lord have mercy. First of all, finding buildings is not easy. I did find out where Wise Library was yesterday. And I know where the library is, so don't get me wrong. It was the center in the room upstairs on the 6th floor that was in the back. And my assistant was like, we're here in the center. I'm like, okay, but the door is locked. Did I know the door closed at 4:30? No, I did not. And they didn't seem to know downstairs that it closed at 4:30 either. So I wasn't feeling so bad. But I think navigating the traffic is different, and figuring out when the students get out. They keep trying to tell me when they get out, but I feel like they're descending on my car every time. I can leave 30 minutes early. It don't make a difference. And then I'm questioning like all my decisions. Like, should I left like an hour early? Well, I couldn't left. And I really go through all that in my car. Like, when can I leave earlier? And so these are basic things to you guys, and I get it. You're experts. I'm not. So that's been some of my challenges. Those are small things as far as challenges, but just figuring out that I did have an opportunity to be here during the summer. So they were gone. So I got to do all my errands and all the different things that made me happy. But I love students, so don't get it confused. I just have to figure out how you all operate. That's it.
When you find out how the students operate, just let us all know.
I will do my best. I will do my best.
So what's your favorite junk food?
Oh, wow. See, listen. So I've done this. I've done this new healthy lifestyle. It didn't just start when I came to WU. You guys are in this profession. Y'all get it. It takes a course of years, right? And so I would love to say it's, but I also love to say it's pasta because it is. And I have a lot of vices that I have no longer been able to do. But, I'm starting to love, this is so weird. I am starting to love fresh green beans, which is very interesting because that is what's on my list, and chard. And so my favorite food, honestly, is sweets. And I've learned to find healthier sweets.
What kind of sweets?
Oh, chocolate is like my thing. Like, I love
it's heart
chocolate.
healthy.
Well, that's what they say. It's also hip healthy too, right? But I do love chocolate and all that stuff.
What's the best chocolate?
Oh, Lord, have mercy. You asking me these. What are you trying to do? Have me go on the back? You better make me go backwards. See?
I'm just trying to get to know you better.
Good, Doc. You must know. I like gooey stuff. So like brownies and ice cream with sundae toppings, like all of it, caramel and all of it. I love all of that. It was so funny. We had an event on Monday and we had cookies. So we had one WVU, and so they had a cookie that was a 1, and then of course we had the flying flag. And I was taking a picture of it for the gram because we live for the gram, right? Instagram. And so I'm taking a picture, and one of my and the program coordinator said, "Vice President, yes, are you about to eat that cookie?" And I said, "No, I'm taking a picture for the gram." So I have a team that I have given straight instructions to that. Listen, I don't do it. I came outside with a healthy candy bar one day. And Richard looked at me like he was going to slap it out my hand. And I had to say, I'm allowed to have this. I'm allowed to have this.
Richard cares.
Richard does care. He does care. Because if not, I'm going to come to you. You're messing up my diet. It's your fault.
Okay. What's your favorite streaming? What are you streaming on Netflix right now?
Wow. Gosh, guys. Okay, so listen. There's a show called Crime and Punishment. And actually was a movie. And it talks about the New York Police Department and how they were doing quotas for citations and how it was profiled in different communities and how it was racially harmful to different populations. So that's one thing that I look at. I am looking at, I do like How to Get Away with Murder. I'm catching up with How to Get Away with Murder. These seem to be like law related, right? There's some issues there, I know. I do like The Good Doctor. I don't know if you all have seen The Good Doctor. I actually like that. They're back. Only had one season. I mean, one show so far. So I can't wait. Can't binge watch that.
Yeah.
So I just like. I do like TV.
Good.
Or Netflix. I should say I'm cable free, but I do like Netflix and Hulu.
What's on your playlist?
Oh wow. So like I love gospel music. I know that's kind of boring to some of y'all, but I do love gospel music. And so this morning has been Sovereign by Daryl Coley.
Oh,
Yeah.
I have to listen.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Share that.
I will.
Put that out there.
Now, of course, I do like other music, but and I used to actually, and I'm not singing today. So if you're talking about music, think I'm singing, I'm not. But
she's good though.
I'm not doing it.
She's
but
good.
I do, but I do. I like what I call neo soul. So like Jill Scott. There's a young lady by the name of Victory Boyd. I saw her in concert in DC. She's absolutely amazing. If you all can hear her live, and her whole family has talent. But Lettucey and NDRE, those are the type of songs, and if you pay attention, they all have a positive theme to them and they're all encouraging. And I think that as we live life, we have to find as many affirmations as we can, because the world can try to beat you up if you let it. And you hear the key words, if you let it, because you have the control of what you allow to be in your life, and you have the control of what you allow to feed you. And I choose to hopefully find positivity to feed me. Doesn't mean I don't have bad days. The sun, the rain does hit me too. But the reality is I try to search for the sunshine. I really do mean that.
And you do.
I do.
Very well. Talk a little bit about the role the church has played in your life.
Oh, wow. So my mom, when you talk about growing up, we spent time in church, to the point where I'm like, I'm never going back to church. But of course, it is my foundation. I definitely, that resets me. It is something that, I think makes me tick. And when one thing about faith, whether you practice or you don't, the reality is that's the key is love. And that's why I approach the stuff that I do the way that I do, is that I love people. And I don't care about what you look like or where you're from or what the background is. The reality is that I love people because that's how I've been raised. And that's from my faith. And so that's one of the reasons why I think I'm able to do this work with the compassion and empathy that I have, because it is how I was raised.
It's who you are, actually, much more than how you're raised. Okay, so we're going to have we have to be facing the three areas that we usually don't talk about.
Sure.
So talk a little bit about maybe not your personal perspectives only, but about this issue that's going on right now with Brett Kavanaugh, with the Me Too movement, with Blasey Ford. And,
Sure.
and I see this as there's a number of very clear articulations that our nation and our state are really changing. And I think this is it's a very critical moment, I think, for all of us. I think we're living in real-time history, which is really kind of amazing.
I agree. And I'll say this to you. Our office, of course, we deal with this. So we do trainings, and many of you have seen my team. So some of you all who are new that have not, we do trainings to talk about sexual assault and how to make a complaint and how to do prevention stuff, right? Not to be a bystander. What does that mean? Not to allow certain behavior to be okay, not to ignore certain things. And the last thing that you do, and I'll say this, I don't care what your politics is in this space, and that really is the deal of it. I've had these conversations. You could have voted for whomever you want to and vote for whoever you want to in the future. But the reality is, when you begin to talk about sexual assault, it is not okay to put politics involved with that, because that is separate and apart. And whether you felt like the Senate was bringing politics in, or the Democrats did this, or Republicans did that, it doesn't matter. The reality is that there was an individual that claimed that something had happened to her. And she has a right to be able to speak on that openly. She has a right to present what information she chooses to present. And she's done that. And that doesn't matter. And let's be real clear, we're talking about this one particular case, but there are men who also are victims. And you need to be very clear about that there is no gender specific when it comes to assault. And And it does not mean that it has to be penetration for it to be an assault. That's the other thing that has to be very clear. There are not levels of trauma in the sense of, oh, well, it wasn't this done to her, so she shouldn't be this upset. Why is she still talking about this? And so the reality is we have to understand that what you see nationally is stuff that some of our students are dealing with, some of the people in this space have dealt with, and what has happened. And this is where I see a lot of positive from this. It has our nation talking about something we should have talked about way before now. Way before now. And there's a lot more in this conversation than just, while we're talking about the sexual assault, there is also, we're talking about privilege. We're talking about white privilege. We're talking about male privilege. We're talking about so many different things in this. And if you don't want to get deep in it, you're going to miss it. If you want to just stick it with politics and you don't want to be bothered with politics, you're missing the conversation that our students are having in their dorm rooms, at the cafeteria. And a lot of us are having too. And so find your place, separate the politics of it, and listen to what's being said. Because I think that if you were to do that, if you were able to be courageous enough to remove all the noise and listen to actually what's being said, you would be better before it.
And I think that your comment earlier, Misha, about the sort of the ability to be seen and to be heard and to be recognized as part of feeling whole and well is the same issue here. Because for a lot of time, people have been saying this, but in very isolated circumstances, and it's now become a national conversation.
Absolutely.
So talk about what you see the opportunities for us here with that kind of a conversation, because it's happening, as you say, in dorm rooms and front rooms and kitchens and clinic buildings, et cetera.
One of the things that amazes me is that we sometimes feel that if we come to work, that the world around us has stopped. And that people don't look at the news before they come or listen to the radio before they come, and that it doesn't impact their behavior. And so whether it be the sexual assault or whether it be a shooting that happens in the street nationally or anything that creates an emotional reaction, you sometimes feel as employees or as professors that the students leave it at the door when they come in. And behavior changes. If people don't feel like people are seeing them or hearing them, we might talk about that invisibility part. If you have this big thing happening in the national news and you're not checking in with your people, I will be honest with you. I think Richard and I talked, I think we need to have a meeting. And the only reason why we haven't had one is because of Diversity Week. And they have me pulled everywhere else. But I feel that this conversation is something that we need to check in. It doesn't mean you want people to report to you if something has happened, but you want people to have a safe space to say, how do you all feel what's going on? And welcome whatever that looks like. I've had someone tell me, I think it's all too convenient. And I said, what do you mean when you say convenient? Well, I just feel like, and that's where the politics came in. And when I broke down to them, I said, so it's convenient to be raped? When does that ever become convenient? And it wasn't in a way to challenge them, to shut them down, because we have to be very comfortable when when we're having these type of conversations. You can shut down a person from not ever having a conversation with you again, or you can grow. And so I listened to them and I said, what do you mean? And I challenged, and I didn't let too much foolishness for me happen too long. But I said, when you say the word too convenient, what it means to me is that it's convenient that it's convenient for her. And she's been living with this for her whole life. It's affected her marriage. It's affected her relationships. It possibly has affected her career as a whole, even though she's a doctor. You don't know how it impacted her. And so we had a dialogue, and they said, well, what I meant when I said that wasn't that I felt it was convenient for her. I felt it was convenient for the overall political scene. And they weren't trying to backtrack or change your conversation. So we do have to sometimes give people an opportunity to explain what they mean, even though it is not what our first reaction would be. Because if I would have just shut that person down, then I would never have been able to say all the other stuff. You need to look at it this way. And rape is rape. And I made sure that when I talked with that person, I never mentioned one side about politics. Because I knew if I went down that road with politics, then the conversation has taken its own life. But if I stay focused on what is real, which is what she's bringing to the table, it may have politics involved, but what she's talking about has substance. And so we stayed there. And when we finished our dialogue, I said, now, I never talked about politics, right? And that's when I went into the lawyer side of me. And I said, we never talk about politics, right? And well, yeah, I know. I said, and so the reason why I didn't is, and then I gave voice to what was really happening and they could hear it because we can get caught up in that chatter. So you have to be very careful. And again, we're using this situation, but it could be any situation. I would say to check in with your team and see where they are with this. See if and some people don't want to be engaged. You got to understand that too. You may say if you want to talk. And again, that's not saying you want people to tell their story if they're not ready to, but it is saying if you need to talk, feel comfortable to talk, because women across the country are being affected. Men across the country are being affected by this. And we are fighting as a country as well. And so it is what we do well, but it's not what we need to always do. So
Very good. We have a question. Yay.
I just wanted to ask you to expand a little bit on the idea of bystander intervention. Certainly that has applications when we're talking about things like trying to prevent sexual harassment and assault, but there's lots of different ways that bystanders might be able to help. And one of the things I'm thinking about is, what if we, in a professional setting, maybe it's a racist comment made by a patient, for example. Maybe it is a coworker or supervisor who says something that might be alienating to someone who's LGBTQ. How do you have that conversation with a colleague, with a patient, in a way that they can hear it? And what tips would you offer?
Thank you for that question. So let me say this. Every single person in this room can be an ally. You ever heard if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu? You ever heard that before? There are rooms that no matter how much of a powerhouse of a leader people may say that I am, I'm not going to always be at every single table, right? I'm not going to be invited to this space. I'm not going to know every conversation that's held in a locker room, and I'm not going to know or be a part of every conversation that's held in a boardroom where there's decisions being made. And so as someone who should not be a bystander, so no one in this space should be a bystander. If you hear something happening in regards to, let's use the example of a patient. And actually was asked this question when I did the retreat for the hospital a couple of weeks ago. And they said, well, what if, we had a patient that did not want to be seen by a minority doctor. And they came out and said they couldn't understand what the person was saying. What should we do if that happens? The easy thing would seem to be to replace the doctor so that the comfortablest patient is comfortable. Now, you guys are doctors and you will correct me, doctor. But in my opinion, I think that the right thing would be for that supervisor to say, well, I will stand in and help translate. Because that doctor has a right to provide care to every single patient that walks through the door. But it's responsibility of the supervisor when it's brought to their attention not to ignore it, or if they notice it, to come in and intervene. And not to make it seem as though it's okay to refuse service from someone because you don't, and they knew, and I'll just say that the individual that said they knew what the reasoning was behind why they were being asked to be replaced. That's what I would think should be right. You have to understand that just because it's brought to your attention that one time doesn't mean that's the first time that doctor or that individual has experienced it. If you are a male, you can be a great ally for a female if you're in a group setting where someone's making jokes about women. Same thing if you're a female. And we can be hard on each other. Let's be real clear, women. Let's talk to each other for a second. Just because you're a woman don't mean you're always friendly to other women. But the reality is we don't do nothing right if we don't have each other. So we're stronger together. And that's the truth of it. You don't have to like my approach. You don't have to like me personally. But if something that can be used to damage the image of a woman is happening, you need to be the one that stands up. So I have to say that because I think some of you women understand what I'm saying when I say that, right? I think that there is no age or profession that dictates how you can be a champion for a conversation. It just has to be that you're bold enough to do it. And so if you're making a policy or you're making a decision that does exclude people, even if you feel like you're the only voice that's stuck out there, you need to raise your hand and you need to say, I think we need to wait. I think we need to have some diversity around this table. I don't think we have the proper diversity that we need. I think in order for us to really say we have been inclusive, we need to do this. And you need to make sure that when you're looking at your policies, that you always, in anything you're doing, whether it's hiring, curriculum, I've heard it said when I first started, the lens of diversity should be included in everything you do. The reality is, if you think that I know we work off a bottom dollar, bottom line, the money. You have how much of 1.8 I think, $1 trillion in regards to just particularly African-American dollars nationwide that is spent on businesses, which includes education, which includes medical care, which includes everything else. You put a list on it. And so the reality is, if you're excluding people from the conversation, if you're not marketing to people because it's not, the cop-out, I believe, is real here in West Virginia. And I'm from here, so I believe I can say it. And anybody want to correct me, I don't have a problem with that either. But we have a cop-out here where we say, well, we're a predominantly white state. We just can't get people to come here. Well, how did the people that came here get here? I mean, that's not real. And secondly, you got folks who were born and raised here. There was a woman who said, well, they don't like mountains, talking about black folk. And I'm like, really? I didn't know that was a part of my DNA. I just don't like mountains. I was born and raised in these hills. And so to tell me I don't like mountains is disrespectful to the people who were born here. And so I think we have to be very careful with these things we just kind of throw around. And so a bystander approach, which will allow that statement just to stay. A champion or an ally is someone who stands up. I think we should, and you can do it respectfully. Come on, people. Excuse me. I know let's revisit something that was stated. I think that might be a overcast a little too wide, right? So don't use that we are a minority or a predominantly white state as a reason for why your department cannot hire people. Don't do that. Don't say that you can't keep women if you haven't talked to women on your team to find out why they have chosen to stay or why they are choosing to leave. If you have minorities, and I've heard this happen as well, where people have said why minorities won't come, and they're talking to a minority group, and they won't ask the minority what their opinion is. So you are still trying to tell people what their voice is and what they believe versus asking the people that are impacted by the decisions and policies that you make. And it all goes back to that courage that I told you about at the very beginning, committing that permission to be uncomfortable, to ask questions you may think you should know, but no one really expects you to know. And so it is being courageous enough to not be a bystander in all areas when you feel like something's being said disrespectfully. Microaggressions, touching people's hair, African-American hair is not okay. Let's be real. I'm speaking for me, and I only relate to me because I don't want to offend someone else. But I am not your pet. And you can tell me that you like my hair from afar. You don't have to touch my hair. I met a woman, and I literally mean all of 2 seconds. I shook her hand, said my name, and she went for my head. And I didn't understand. How did we get so close and familiar? And so the reason that is offensive, so those that ask the question, why is that such a big deal? They're just complimenting. The reality isn't, everybody didn't say, well, why are we going so far back? The civil rights movement was only 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, I have been seen as chattel to people that feel as though they can walk up on me and do whatever they want with my body, including touch and pet me. And so that's why when you do something like that, it may not be intentional, but it does have lasting effects. You may did it at 8 o'clock in the morning when you first came in because you saw them for the first time at the beginning of the week, and that person may be dealing with it at 8 o'clock. They didn't call 10 people in their family. Girl, can you let me tell you what such and such did? Because to you, it means nothing. But to culture, people who have different backgrounds, it does cause problems sometimes. And so you have to be made aware of what you're doing. It doesn't mean that you intended to do harm. It doesn't mean that you are doing harm and maliciously or that you are attempting to offend that person. And before, and I know we have a question, but I want to say this other thing. When someone brings an offense to you, I think this is what I find to be amazing, and it still amazes me. And I'm going to say the statement first, and then I'm going to explain. I find it amazing that when I'm offended, when I share that offense with someone, they become offended. Does that make sense? And so the reality is, if you've offended me some way, let's say Clay walked up on me and said something that was not appropriate. And I come to him, and most of the time, we've taken time, we've thought through it, we've gotten all kinds of different counsel and asked somebody what they thought, they've given their opinion, and after we get the 30th opinion, we come back and say, Clay, I want to talk to you. And I tell Clay, and I say it as nice as I can say it, and I measure my words, because believe it or not, some of us have to measure our words because we'll be seen as hostile or angry or upset. So I have to figure out how to placate a pain that was caused upon me so that you don't get offended. And then I say, I didn't like what you did, Clay, because da, 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 da. And I give you all the reasons in the world. I use all my skills. I paid all this money to get for a lawyer. And then Clay said, well, I'm offended you believe that. And so then I got to spend all the time that I just took the counsel myself of how to have the conversation to explain to him I didn't mean to offend him. So then my voice is muted yet again because everything I was trying to bring to him for him to see has now turned into how it's a problem for him. And so you have to be very careful that as people are coming to you and as you begin to open up your departments, that you allow people to be real. We talk about that wholeness. And I'm not telling real and unprofessional. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying be real, be clear, and be candid enough to share their hearts with you so that we can move further down the road, because we stay in a state of offense and we never get to the place of healing. And this time we get there. That's how I feel. I'm so sorry.
That is so good. I would say that the key that I think that you just talked about is really creating safety enough that people can be authentic with each other, but not unkind.
That's true.
Jeff.
So just to follow up on the bystander question, like both of you, I travel a lot in this region, not just West Virginia, but the rural region that we're in. And I see a symbol that I think we all see frequently, and that's the Confederate flag, flying in front of a home or pasted on the back of a truck. And it bothers me. And I think it bothers many people. I don't obviously know how that feels as an African American. Would like to hear your thoughts in terms of what does it mean to people, minorities who see that symbol? How do we as white people in this community try to address that in a constructive way? I don't think we can intervene directly because most of those trucks also have guns in them. So I think, the question is how do we work to address that symbol, which I think is so powerful and destructive?
Sure. So there's a song named Strange Fruit, and it says black bodies swinging on a poplar tree. And it talks about the smell of rotten fruit, bulging eyes, and the smell of flesh. And so when I think of the Confederate flags, I think of lynchings, and I think of killings, and I think of death, and I think of fear. And so every time I've ever seen a Confederate flag in the history in which we all share, so it's not just we got different history that we share. Every time I've ever seen a Confederate flag used publicly, and the history that I can remember. So let's say that too, because people tell me it's the history that we're representing when we do this, where half of them can't even repeat the history that they are responding to me with. The history that I have seen it with was the KKK, where white sheets walk down the streets. I have seen it. I went to school in Louisiana, and I remember from my home to Southern University, which is historically Black College and Institute University, I remember seeing a big pickup truck, and it was almost every single day. And I don't know if they had a job at all, but I know they ran up and down that road. And they had a flag on one side, and they had a Confederate flag on the other. And they ran it up and down, and I saw it every time. And so when I think of a Confederate flag, I see hate. I don't see history. And I see the hate within the history in which I live in. And so when I see it represented in 2018, I can't connect it to anything else. When I see conversations that divide a country, that continue to say that people are not welcome and they don't belong, and that flag is associated with that conversation, then I can't get anywhere else. I can have a conversation with anyone in regards to it, but my stationary foundation of what it has meant to my people remains. But I will hear the conversation of history that someone wants to share with me, and I will allow them that opportunity, but I don't believe it to be true in my eye because I've seen the death and the turmoil that comes from it. The question is, how can you communicate it, or how can you address it when you see it? I mean, I think that you have to be very clear. People are people. And if we could change this world to think as much and as open-minded as we all want them to, then we would have just a different place.
We got to be short on these last two.
Okay. So,
5 minutes.
sorry.
Please. No, it's great.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Hi. So my question comes in terms of like expecting or concerns, expecting people of minority communities teaching us how to be like allies. What are your thoughts on expecting people who have been oppressed to be educating people who are the oppressors?
So I think it's tiring,
Yeah.
right? And I think to say it any differently would be disrespectful. I think that it is not the responsibility of minorities to be the champion of every conversation, like I said before. It takes ownership of the professor to be the teacher. And I think that you have a role and you have been hired to be a professor, and that you should have a safe space as a student to feel like you can come and not have to be the expert for everything that looks like you or has the background of you. And I think that you should be emboldened and empowered enough to say that to your professor, and that you can say, if this is a conversation that I think that you should do research on. I mean, the reality is that we are all learning together, but you don't have to be the teacher for everything. And that I don't have to be everything to every Black. I don't speak for all Black people. We don't meet all on the same day and discuss what the issues are. I mean, and I'm just being honest.
That's good. Last question.
Thank you.
I still want to call you Delegate Poor. So thank you, Delegate Poor, for representing me during your time in the state legislature.
Thank you
And I
for
think that
having me.
you did a really good job of representing vulnerable populations who were missed by a lot of officials, I think, during that crisis. And so I kind of, with that, want to bring that into the role of the Health Sciences Center here. And in your role, one of the things that we talk about is inclusion, and how do we make our spaces more inclusive. So thinking about here in the Health Sciences Center, where a lot of the field is dominated by white males,
Mhm.
and not to disrespect or not to disrespect any of the people that have come before us, but how do we as faculty, staff, students make our spaces more inclusive here in health sciences? And I think about my experience as a student, and I used to, and I'm going to get uncomfortable here. Walking down the hall of white guys is what I call it. There were a bunch of pictures in this hall down here, and it was a bunch of very established white male scientists, medical professionals, and I thought, where's there space for me here in this building?
Mhm.
And I also think about that when I'm in a class, and what I see reflected in the presentations or in the lectures is, where do I fit into this if I'm not a white male? So I can only imagine the experience of being a person of color, and very rarely seeing a person of color represented in any other role other than a victim.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious, what do you think we here in the health sciences can do in all of those different roles to support inclusion?
So let me do two things, and I know I have to be brief, and that's very hard to ask a former politician and lawyer to be brief.
You're
But-
doing amazing.
But
Amazing.
let me say this. So there's two things you can do as a staff that can help us as an institution learn, and that is to do the culture survey. So I want to make sure I talk to you about that, because you can tell us if you feel like you do have an inclusive community. If you don't, then we work on it as an administrator. And then two, if you are a student, we have a survey that's also in UNews that you can tell us what you feel, if you feel like you belong or you don't, because you do need to speak back to the administration so that we can figure out how to do programming. I think that it is a responsibility, and let's say this, you don't have to give a disclaimer to say that you see all white men, because that's the reality, okay? And we have to be okay not having to apologize for what we see. We see what we see. And I think it's your responsibility to speak up on that, which is what you've done. I think the other thing is that we have to be real clear that representation matters, and it goes to commercials, and it goes to advertising and marketing. And so if I come to this campus and I'm always searching for me and I never find me, then I've made a decision that I'm not welcomed. I made a decision that I really don't belong here. I'm going to find a place that looks like me, and a place that at least reflects that I'm there. And so I would say to you, everything is image. And so how you market yourself as a medical area does matter as to the people who's walking down the streets and who decide to come here, and does matter to your employees. Remember, we're not just talking about students. We're talking about people who want to come here. And if they walk down a tour of this institution and they don't see anything that looks like them, and every brochure sure doesn't have anyone to look like them, then that might be a part of why you're not being successful with your recruitment. If you're recruiting to the same list you've recruited to for the last few years, and your search committees look the same as they've done the last 5 years, and they've had no diversity on it, and you haven't chosen to figure it out, and I'm not talking about just keep on, we need one Black person, we need one Asian, we need one, we're not talking about doing tokenism. We're talking about intentional partners and players in the selection process of your people who work and employ at this institution. And so, yes, I'm using words that we don't want to talk about, because I need to make sure you're hearing what I say, because there's no reason to make fake what's really happening. No one wants to be selected just because they are one group or another. They want to be selected because you have value of their brain and their intellect, and you believe that they can do something for this institution to be better. And if you're not approaching people in that way and you're not targeting people in that way, then we're going to have a lot more work to do in my role, and you're going to keep me employed. And I appreciate that, but I don't want it that way.
So we're at 101 and we
Okay.
have a
I
class waiting outside.
apologize.
No. I want you to give your just final, very brief hopes for this diversity week and for
Okay,
the
sure.
ongoing.
What I made you all do when you first started, and one of the words I said is that you said, and you committed to me that you were committed. And so the only thing I can say is that you need to do that heart work, is what I call it. And you need to check back in with yourself throughout the course of the rest of this year and beyond, and see if you are still committed to this cause. See if you're being honest with yourself and if you are being an ally to the conversation of diversity. And if you're not, I'm telling you, let's get to work. Let's make it happen, because we can do it one step at a time. I don't expect you to be like me and Clay. I'm not expecting you to make anybody else. Do your thing, but you got to make some type of movement, and you have to be committed. So I'd ask you just to keep working with us, keep coming out, and we'll keep educating the best we can.
That's awesome. Thank you, Misha. Welcome back. I'll do that again.